Hey, welcome back to another segment of Open Mic. My name is Wesley Smotherman. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here at Asbury Church. If you're new to the channel, make sure you go to the Asbury Church YouTube page, like and subscribe it so you can get notifications on when these videos are coming out, as well as the Asbury Counseling Facebook page. Like those videos and also leave a comment on some things that you would like to hear from. That's the biggest thing about Open Mic is we want to hear from you guys. We want to hear some of the challenges that you're having and some of the questions that have been lingering in your mind so that we can talk about these things, because let's be real, there's a lot of things going on at this time, a lot of questions that we have, and that's what our goal is at Open Mic, is to help answer those tough questions. So if you weren't here last week we did a segment on how to prepare your kids for COVID and for school, apologize for school. And if you haven't watched that video, go back and watch it because it's very helpful and it's really going to help you as well as your kids just adapt to this new chapter in their lives. Today, we're going to talk about self-care, and we're going to talk about, what that looks like for us and why now? Why talk about that now? And so, you may have heard a lot of podcasts or teachings and learnings about self-care, but today I want to look at it from a very different perspective. So today, if you are not aware of, I want to discuss with you Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a very popular, especially for us in the field, and very applicable today on just kind of how we view people's lives, as well as to check in with ourselves to see how we are doing. Now, if you look, you'll see the Maslow's hierarchy of needs on the screen, and there are different segments that we basically grow through that help us in our journey of life. And as we look at this pyramid of different chapters in our life and different areas of growth, it's important to recognize where you were now and kind of what area has been lacking. And the idea is that each level has been fully experienced and well balanced, it helps the next level to continue on. And so the 5 levels, of course, is psychological needs is the bottom, safety needs is the second, life or love and belonging is the third, self-esteem, and then self-actualization. And so I want to go over briefly what each of those categories are and really help you look at that from a perspective of self-care, as well as to compare this to how this diagram can be helpful in the time of COVID as well as school. So at the very bottom of the Maslow hierarchy of needs is the psychological needs. And this is people who, if you have food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and this may sound very basic for a lot of people, but there are people that during COVID struggled with this need. And so if you were at the bottom of the pyramid, which is what we all start off with very early on as toddlers, this is what we need. This is all we need, right? As a toddler, we need food, shelter, and clothes, and be able to sleep. When we develop that and we continue and we get that and we're balanced in that, then we can move on to the next step, which is the safety needs. And the safety needs is just, do I have resources? Do I have support? If I need something, do I have access to that? And that's very important. When we can get to a place in our lives where we have that safety, well, then that helps us move on to the next stage, which is self-esteem, or love and belonging. So love and belonging is friendships, intimacy, and when we are in a place where we feel safe, then we will be able to have those relationships, especially those intimate relationships with our significant others. And so after we begin to get that, we move on to the next stage of self-esteem. Just the respect and the freedom and the morals and values, and just really trying to better ourselves. And of course, the last part is when we have surpassed that, and we're always not going to surpass that, but when we are balanced in that, we move to the next stage of self-actualization, which is dreaming, which is looking to the future, always finding ways to better yourself. And so as you look at these hierarchy of needs, one thing that comes to my mind is, what do you think most of the people in the United States as well as the world struggled with during the COVID? And I know everybody's going to be different on which areas they struggled with and which areas they didn't. But when you look at this scale and you start to realize, especially for yourself, if there were certain areas that you lacked, then it makes it very difficult for you to grow and have a really well-balanced life. And so if during COVID happened and you lost your job and you didn't know how you were going to provide for food, well, that's at the very bottom of the pyramid. And if that is something that you've been focusing on, something that you've been worrying about, then safety is going to be a concern. And if you don't have that safety, the love and belonging, the self-esteem, and the dreaming is something that's going to be very difficult. For a lot of us, I think because of COVID, we have become so present-minded that I hear a lot of people have stopped dreaming or even stopped thinking about what the future is going to hold. You know, I think there's so many of us that are struggling right now financially and even maybe physically with our health that we're not thinking about, you know, this Christmas. We're not thinking about the next 2, 3, 4 years because we are so focused on what's happening right now that it's really keeping us from really having that dream of what my life is going to look like, a dream that we all want to push forward. And so the question is, where are you on this pyramid? Are there certain areas that the COVID took from you? You know, maybe you didn't have to worry about finances, and maybe you had food and shelter, and maybe safety was not a concern for you, but maybe the relationships were. Maybe because of the loved one being in a rest home or being at a hospital and you not having the ability to connect with them, maybe that really hurt your ability to connect with people, and maybe that really put a hole in your heart because of that connection that you really long for. And maybe because of all that stuff going on, the next step was self-esteem. Maybe your self-esteem has been shot. Maybe you've just been really depressed or really anxious, worried about school, worried about work, or even worried about getting a job. All these things are really important, and we have to begin to really take a step back and examine our lives to say, what are we missing? What areas of the pyramid are we lacking? And what are some of the things that COVID and school and all this stuff took from us? And how can we get that back? And so as you begin to focus on those 5 areas of the pyramid, I basically want to talk about just 4 areas of self-care and briefly talk about each of them and how you can better yourself in those 4 areas. So when we talk about self-care, you know, basically I like to think about 4 areas. And I usually ask people, how's your cognitive needs? How's your physical needs, your emotional needs, and spiritual needs? Now, cognitively, you know, it could be the things that you think about, the things that you ponder. Physically, it could be just kind of like how you're doing with your body. Are you healthy? You know, are you eating foods that you shouldn't? Are you working out? Or you're not. And then the emotional needs is, who are you going to talk to about some of the things that are on your heart? Because let me be honest, this has not been easy for me as well as a lot of people. And I know sometimes not being able to have that support system and those friends that we can depend on really keep us from being emotionally healthy because we don't have an outlet that we can talk to, especially those who depend on the church. You know, to go to church and to have those conversations and be able to worship and listen to a sermon, even that has been difficult for a lot of people to not be able to attend church because of everything going on. And then, of course, your spiritual needs. How are you doing spiritually? Are you feeding yourself spiritually? Have you spent time praying? Have you spent time in the Word? Or have you been so busy and just consumed with everything going on that we've just almost forgotten? And so as we look at these areas, I want you to think about, out of cognitive, physical, emotional, and spiritual, which areas are you lacking? What are some of the areas that maybe you're stronger in? And what are some of the areas that could use more growth? I know when we think about the cognitive, I really honestly think we got to be careful about what we're feeding our minds. You know, I've encouraged a lot of my clients to unplug yourself from social media, unplug yourself from the news, and give your mind a break from thinking about all the stuff that we're seeing on the news. You know, when it comes to physical, how are you doing physically? Have you had the ability to eat the way that you want to eat or take care of your body the way that you've wanted to take care of it? What are some things you could do, whether it's a diet, whether that's working out, whatever that may be, how are you doing physically? And then emotionally, how are you feeling here? How's your heart feeling? Have you been able to talk to somebody about the way you feel? Have you been sad? Have you been dealing with anxiety or depression or even suicide ideation? Whatever it may be, how are you doing emotionally? And then, of course, spiritually, how are you doing spiritually? How's your walk with the Lord going? When a person can take a step back and examine those 4 areas, that's the best place to start on how to better who you are as a person. And so the most important thing in all of this is knowing yourself. And you'd be very surprised how a lot of people really don't know who they really are. Not just like who they are as a person, but what makes them tick. It took me a long time, even in this field, to pay attention to these 4 areas because it's very easy to focus on your physical needs and your spiritual needs. But I really do think we neglect and almost forget about our emotional needs and our cognitive needs. And so those are the 4 areas I want to encourage you on taking an inventory and examine yourself to see which areas need more work. Because you are no good to your family, you're no good to your spouse, to your kids, and to your employees if you are low on fumes. And so as school begins to start, take this opportunity to find ways to connect with yourself. Because only when can you connect with yourself, you are able to connect with other people. I hope this was helpful for you guys today. Again, please tune in as we will have another episode next week on Open Mic. Again, please like and subscribe us on the Asbury Church YouTube page and begin also on the Facebook page, Asbury Counseling Center. Thank you guys so much. I hope this was helpful for you guys.